All right, welcome to The Explainer. So today we're diving into a really fascinating and pretty complex thesis. It asks a simple question. What if a whole series of celestial events coming up soon aren't random at all? What if they're actually a countdown, spelled out in the stars, and tied directly to some ancient prophecies? We're going to break down this entire timeline, which runs from 2032 all the way to 2037.
The entire argument we're about to walk through is built on this one ancient prophetic sequence right out of the book of Joel. And the key here, the absolute key, according to the source material, is the specific order it lays out. It says first, the moon turns to blood, and then the sun goes dark. That order is everything. So let's see exactly how this thesis builds on that very specific foundation. Okay, so here's our game plan for this. First, we're going to look at the main celestial event that anchors this whole timeline. After that, we'll trace its shadow across the globe, check out what are described as the warning signs, and then, finally, try to decode the prophetic clock that supposedly ties this whole thing together. Let's get into it.
All right, let's dive right in. The central claim, the core idea of this whole thing, is that a very specific total solar eclipse happening in 2034, it's not just another astronomical event. The argument is that it's a celestial starting gun, kicking off a super precise 3.5-year countdown.
So you gotta ask, right? What makes this one particular solar eclipse so important in this thesis? There are eclipses all the time. Why is the one on March 20th, 2034 the one that's being singled out as this huge primary sign? Well, the analysis we're looking at points to this incredible convergence of several really rare factors, and we're talking about things happening both in the sky and on the calendar at the exact same time. The argument is that when you see all these pieces line up, the event transforms from just a simple eclipse into something else, something they're calling a prophetic marker.
Okay, let's really break this down. First, the date, March 20th, 2034. That's not just any old day. That is the vernal equinox, the first day of spring. And look at the type. It's a total solar eclipse, and it's a long one, lasting over 4 minutes. This deep, prolonged darkness is what's being interpreted as a literal fulfillment of that ancient imagery. The sun becoming black as sackcloth.
And that timing, well, it's absolutely crucial to the argument. Think about it. The vernal equinox is the start of spring. It's supposed to be the day that symbolizes light winning out over darkness. So for the sun to be completely blotted out from the sky on that exact day, the thesis argues that's like a profound plot twist in the natural order, a celestial interruption that is meant to symbolize judgment.
Okay, but it doesn't stop there. Let's add the next layer to this puzzle. So we all know a solar eclipse can only happen on a new moon. Well, it just so happens that this specific new moon marks the beginning of the biblical religious year, a day called Nisan 1. And get this, it's also known as the New Year for Kings. So imagine a total solar eclipse on what is basically a celestial coronation day for royalty. Yeah, that's interpreted as a pretty severe omen for the governments of the world.
All right, so we've got the when. Now let's look at the where. Let's move to the path of totality, because this is where the argument gets even more specific. It's not just about the timing of the eclipse, it's about where that shadow actually falls on the Earth. And the claim is that this path isn't random. It specifically targets nations that are mentioned in biblical prophecy. So the shadow's journey kicks off over Africa. And one of the very first nations it crosses is Sudan. Now, why does that matter? Well, the source material identifies Sudan as the ancient land of biblical Cush. And that's a huge deal because Cush is explicitly named as a key player in this big end times coalition that's described in the book of Ezekiel.
As the shadow keeps moving east, it just grazes the southern part of Egypt. And remember what we said about the timing? This is all happening during Nisan, which is the exact same biblical month as the Exodus. So you can see the direct parallel they're drawing here. It's meant to echo that plague of darkness that struck Egypt all those thousands of years ago. Next up, the eclipse cuts right across the Arabian Peninsula, slicing through central Saudi Arabia. Now, this is seen as really significant because even within Islamic tradition itself, solar eclipses are often seen as pretty heavy signs from God, as a call for repentance or maybe a warning of judgment to come.
But here's maybe the most pointed part of the entire path, at least according to the source. It's the journey over Iran. The shadow passes directly over the Bushehr nuclear facility. And the timing is just wild. This happens on the Persian New Year, Nowruz, which is always celebrated on the equinox. So you have this moment they call the darkening of Persia's might, and it's being connected directly to prophecies found in Jeremiah 49.
And finally, the shadow's long journey comes to an end. It terminates over the volatile regions of Afghanistan and Pakistan. This whole corridor is linked in prophetic literature to the kings of the East. So when you zoom out, you see a complete path that sweeps right across the heart of the Islamic world, all the way from the Nile River to the Indus.
Okay, let's circle back for a second. Remember that core rule from the prophecy in Joel. The moon into blood has to happen before the sun turns dark. The order is non-negotiable. So if this thesis is going to hold up, there absolutely has to be some kind of major lunar event before 2034. Let's take a look at the evidence they present for that precursor. So the source points to a pretty rare astronomical pattern called a tetrad. What's a tetrad? It's just 4, count them 4, consecutive total lunar eclipses, back to back. You probably know them as blood moons. And this series of 4 blood moons, which happens in 2032 and 2033, is presented as the prophetic warning shot, the thing that sets the stage for the main event in 2034.
But, and this is a big but, here's where things get a little tricky. If you just pull up a standard Jewish calendar and check these dates, you'll see they don't seem to line up with the big feast days. And frankly, this apparent mismatch is exactly why a lot of researchers have just dismissed this whole tetrad as being totally insignificant. But the thesis says, hold on, you're looking at the wrong calendar.
Okay, so this whole analysis really hinges on a conflict between two different calendars. Think of it like a digital watch versus an old-school sundial. The modern calendar we use today is calculated, it's mathematical, it runs on a fixed formula. But the ancient one was observational. They literally had to go out and look at the fields. The new year couldn't start until the barley was ripe in Israel. So the claim is this: in 2032, that mathematical calendar is going to be about a month too early. The observational one, though, waiting for the actual harvest, will be forced to add a leap month. And that 1-month delay, that's the magic key that allegedly snaps everything perfectly into place, lining up that first blood moon exactly with Passover.
Okay, so now we've got the sun sign, we've got the moon signs. It's time to connect them to the final piece of this incredible puzzle, the math. Specifically, a 1,260-day countdown, which is a key prophetic time period that shows up in both the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation.
The core calculation here is actually pretty straightforward. You start on the day of the big solar eclipse. That's March 20th, 2034. And then you just count forward exactly 1,260 days. That's it. When you do the math, and you got to remember to include the leap year in 2036, it brings you to one very specific end date, August 31st, 2037.
And here's the punchline of that whole calculation. That countdown doesn't just land on some random Tuesday. Nope, it ends on August 31st, 2037, which is right at the very beginning of the traditional 30-day season of repentance that leads into the fall feasts. But wait, there's more. A related 1,290-day count, which is mentioned in the very same prophecies, lands exactly on the day considered the final day of judgment in that whole feast cycle. The precision is what's being highlighted.
So, after all that, after weaving through astronomy, geography, ancient calendars, and some pretty specific prophetic math, what's the takeaway? What's the ultimate conclusion of this thesis?
The thesis basically concludes that what you're seeing is a perfect storm. It's the sheer statistical improbability of all of it happening together. I mean, think about it. You have the warning blood moons, then a totally unique solar eclipse right on the biblical New Year. It's shadow tracing a prophetic path across the globe, and a mathematical countdown that lands perfectly on the religious calendar. The argument is that when all of these things converge like this, it creates what they call a high watch window.
So in the end, the source material we've walked through doesn't give us a definitive yes or no. It doesn't claim to have all the answers. Instead, it leaves us with a really provocative question. It presents a compelling case that these celestial events, which look random to most of us, might not be random at all. That maybe, just maybe, they're part of a much larger, unfolding story, a narrative being told not with words, but in the precise, silent movements of the sun, moon, and stars.